Is there a misconception of the fact that when we become famous that we have these beautiful, perfect lives and that nothing is ever on a low? It's a bad conception, because then people always think that you have to be this grand old person that's just happy about life and everything because what, we got money? Well, money doesn't make you happy. It never did. I mean, history will tell you that.
Whitney Houston's passing has still got a lot of people pointing fingers and asking questions about her life and what was really going on behind the scenes, especially what her marriage was really like with Bobby Brown. Now, their relationship was super dysfunctional, and it wasn't just Bobby that was stepping out, but even Whitney allegedly cheated. And one of the people she was allegedly stepping out with was her bodyguard, David Roberts, who was also allegedly the inspiration for her movie, The Bodyguard. Ciao. And now this bodyguard is back in the public eye as he just released a tell-all book called Protecting Whitney, revealing intimate details about Whitney's life. But this time around, he's doing something that no one else has done. Instead of talking negatively about Whitney, he's shining a light on how those around her failed her and why he was forced to stay away from Whitney after Bobby Brown learned that he was in love with her. Now, baby, this is a lot of tea because there's been tons of books and movies about Whitney, but no one ever put out something like this. Let's give a bit of background before we get into this, okay? Whitney was somebody who was pulled in every which way. Everyone wanted a piece of that voice without actually caring about the person behind it. She was bleeding herself dry and went on more tours than anyone in her league. And by the end of those tours, Whitney's voice would go from a soprano to mezzo-soprano because of how exhausted she was. And then, y'all know there's this black tax thing when the whole family, I mean the immediate family, also the aunties and uncles, and all kind of cousins you ain't never even heard of, leech off of the person who is successfully coming out of poverty. And for a superstar like Whitney, it was way too much. She started carrying her family on her back when she was just 18 years old, and most of them, if not all of them, were living off her. She even had brothers who were on payroll by her own admission just because. Bobby was always acting a fool and was high-key jealous of Whitney's success, and it was always working.
After Whitney filmed the movie Bodyguard, her stardom shot up to the sky. And her and Bobby had just got married, and that's where he started to become really jealous because the lady was like, yeah, because Whitney was a superstar and he had a couple of hits. So she was like, he was just really jealous.
There was no one for Whitney to really depend on, and folks were always saying how Robin Crawford was this unspoken hero and she would have saved Whitney if given a chance. But she ain't never been no savior, and just like the others around Whitney, Robin wanted something too. And sources close to the situation have said that Robin always wanted to become Whitney's manager and felt like she was owed more than she actually got since she was right there from the beginning. Robin talked about Whitney's success as we or our thing, and she even inserted herself in Whitney's national anthem performance just because she allegedly picked out the outfit. She was no savior, and she had her own selfish reasons for moving away, and her ego couldn't handle the fact that Whitney chose her family over everything else.
And it could build you up to tear you down.
You said it was a very lonely place.
But it is a lonely place. It's a lonely place to be, and you're misunderstood, you're misjudged, all kinds of things,
And this was the situation that Roberts met when he first met Whitney and became her bodyguard. He was Whitney's bodyguard from roughly 1988 to 1995. So he was basically right there at the height of her career. But Roberts said that when he first met her, he didn't know a thing about her. He had never heard of her. He had never heard her music. And he didn't want the gig because he had been around enough music stars to know how they get down when the cameras aren't around. Roberts really talked about her the same way that Kevin Costner did, and maybe in another life, Whitney and Kevin really did end up together with their babies and grandbabies, but let's talk about that another day and focus on what the reality was. As soon as Roberts met Whitney, he was smitten and immediately went out and brought all of her albums and listened to everything she had out. He also became very protective over her and took his job as her bodyguard very seriously. Roberts was someone who had worked as a security professional for many years and for many high-profile individuals, and he knew more than anyone how important it was to keep his emotions out of the picture when it came to his clients. He said, "As a close protection officer, I was absolutely focused on keeping her safe. If you cross that line, you lose your objectivity, and that makes it dangerous for the person you're protecting." But when it came to Whitney, Roberts found himself crossing boundaries that he never thought he'd cross. He admitted that he was so emotionally close to Whitney that he would have left everything for her had she given him a chance. In the beginning, his gig with Whitney was just supposed to last for 3 months. But when he got a chance to extend it indefinitely, he took the ball and ran with it. He saw her break down multiple times in her hotel room while he had to stand guard over her, and he also watched Whitney put herself back together with a big smile on her face when it was time to perform and wow the crowd. Whitney had already been introduced to substances as a teenager, and when her second album really started blowing up and her name was everywhere, Whitney was feeling the pressure and began to heavily rely on substances and alcohol to keep her going. But the thing is that Whitney also came to rely on Roberts, and she completely trusted him to be there for her, even when those around her were acting like vultures trying to eat her alive. In fact, Roberts was probably the only one in her inner circle who was concerned about how Whitney's addiction was getting out of hand. Roberts talked about how Whitney would always hold on to the back of his shirt when she felt nervous in public, and made sure to never leave her side unless Whitney had asked him to do so. One evening, when there weren't many people around, Roberts remembered how Whitney affectionately laid her head on his shoulder, and even though he'd always tried to be this stoic guy and not give away his emotions, he was tempted to give up everything for the opportunity to change their roles from professional to a private one. But both Roberts and Whitney knew that as soon as he made a move on her, he would be sent packing to the UK, and it would probably be the last time they saw each other. Roberts said, "That's why Frank Farmer, Costner's character in The Bodyguard, and Rachel Marin, Whitney's character, couldn't be together. He crossed the line, and that was the end of him in the capacity of what he was employed to do." But a few days later, Whitney made a gesture that showed Roberts that he wasn't the only one who had caught feelings. In 1998, while he was in his hotel room at the Regency Hotel in Hong Kong, Whitney pushed a note under his door and went away. On the note, the words were, "I will always love you." Roberts kept that note, but he and Whitney never addressed it, and the note became his unspoken secret between the two of them. But just because they didn't talk about it out loud didn't mean that others couldn't see what was going on between them, and Bobby Brown was so mad about that. Bobby never liked Roberts, and Roberts sure as heck never had anything remotely positive to say about Bobby. Roberts even said that he would use Bobby as a human shield without thinking twice if anyone ever shot at Whitney. According to him, Whitney marrying Bobby was the time her life really started to get out of control. Bobby constantly tried to ridicule and fuel Whitney's insecurities, and he was doing a fine job at it since Whitney was slowly getting out of control. Even when Whitney was tired and terrified just before she gave birth to Bobby Christina, Brown still showed up to the hospital completely drunk, and Roberts had to take him aside and make him presentable because he didn't want Whitney feeling some type of way when she saw her husband that way at the birth of their first child together. According to Roberts, Bobby felt some type of joy keeping Whitney vulnerable and put her through a lot of verbal and physical abuse, that she slowly lost everything and was barely functioning as the person he once knew. Instead of just backing away from the situation like he was supposed to do, Roberts tried to intervene, but it was always shut down by Bobby, and he tried not to do so much so that he could still be around to look out for Whitney. But one day when he saw her breaking down, Roberts pulled Whitney aside and told her that her husband was deliberately destroying her self-esteem and breaking her down, and she should leave him. When he couldn't get through to Whitney, he did one thing that he was never supposed to do, and he went to the record label execs to tell them exactly what was going on and spill that tea. But he didn't know that that was exactly what Bobby Brown had been waiting for. And when Bobby heard that Roberts had gone to the label, he made his own report about him, calling him unprofessional, and continued to double down until the label eventually had Roberts removed and sent him away. After he left, it was like Whitney had gotten fully thrown to the wolves until things turned out the way that they did. And Roberts has been calling out everyone who failed her, especially Bobby Brown, and folks are backing him up. I'm here for the book. Expose these people that wasn't good to her. And it's forever F the industry and the people that claimed to love her but only saw her as a meal ticket. Whitney was quite literally surrounded by leeches and vultures, and the people that actually did care about her were pushed out of her life by those who wanted to manipulate and take advantage of her. It's so sad, really. Why do we always lose the brightest stars? I'm not surprised. A lot of people were jealous of her and let her get deeper into her addiction with crack. But what do y'all think about this? Sound off in the comments and make sure you like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, baddies.